Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, sorry, good noon, everyone. I know my presentation is before you went to lunch, so I'll try and keep it somewhat interesting. This is not about technology. This is not about innovation. This is about a fundamental question. And what I'll try to do in the next few minutes that we have, I'll cover three things. One is I'll introduce myself. My name's Aditya. I've been working in the pharma industry for the past 25 years, about half and half split in R&D versus consulting. And we founded RAS in 2014, and we recently expanded into in 2022 in the Middle East, North Africa region. What do? We are fully focused on healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and medical devices. We offer very standard services like strategy support, like qualitative market research and competitive intelligence. And what are we going to talk about today? We'll go through some examples of innovation. We will then look at also some of the parameters of health, where they stand today, basic parameters of health. We will try and see whether that lends itself to some kind of an innovation, progress, burden paradox. And if yes, then how do we go about resolving it? This is not about technology. This is really about trying to solve a fundamental problem, which I think merits some attention. So let's get started. So what I'll do is, from the next two slides, I'm going to take you through some examples of innovation. Please don't read too much into the actual labels themselves. The idea is that they are illustrative. They're the tip of the iceberg. Most people here have been involved for probably decade, 2 decades, or 3 decades in either the development, in the research, or in the commercialization of innovation. So a lot of these names would be familiar to you. Now, if you look at the slide, you see there are two oncolytics, one being Herceptin and Gleevec, and the common thread there is actually the increase in the lifespan of 5-year survival. If you look at the anti-infectives, whether it is antiretrovirals or Gardasil, or for that matter, Sovaldi, again, you see some common themes. Themes being reduction of infections, prevalence improving, the near lifespan itself, reducing deaths, increasing survival. Liraglutide, in light of today's incretins, I suppose one would think, why is there? It's just a symbol of a innovation in the GLP-1 area, which is essentially making a lot of changes and strides in the metabolic disease space today. So now, what this essentially tells us that most of these medicines that you see here, they have contributed to increasing survival. Increased survival is increased lifespan. Keep that term in mind because we're going to use it in a bit. Taking to the second part of the timeline, let's say if you think in terms of the last 30 years, so we covered the first 15 years. Now let's cover the next 15 years. And what you would see is immune checkpoint inhibitors here. You also see CAR-Ts, PCSK9 inhibitors, SGLT2 inhibitors, etc. And what you notice here is, again, the same kind of an activity, which is you have an increase in survival. For example, pembrolizumab, Kymriah, and you have improvement in cardiovascular events, adverse cardiorenal events, when you look at either PCSK9 inhibitors or SGLT2 inhibitors. And if you look at Trikafta, it's a very interesting, elegant engineering solution where protein trafficking actually solved a problem of cystic fibrosis, which was primarily a steroid-driven disease. And then, of course, you have COVID-19 vaccine, which by some conservative estimates led to avoiding approximately 20 million deaths. So again, we are talking about increasing lifespan. We are talking about reducing the prospect of untimely death. What does that mean? So what we're going to do in the next couple of slides is we will look at the start of the basic population. So global population today is estimated at around 8.2 billion people, give or take, and it is expected to grow close to about 10 billion in the next 2.5 decades. So that's a cumulative increase of about 20%. Now, when we look at obesity, defined as an BMI, however imperfect that measure may be, as greater than 30 kilogram per meter squared, the increase in population is about from 1 billion today to about 2.3. Perhaps the number is even going to be higher if you look at some other estimates too. If you look at hypertension, defined as systolic blood pressure of greater than 130 millimeters of mercury, the number goes approximately the same, about 1.3 to 2+ billion people. in 25 years. And finally, if you look at diabetes, the numbers seem to be quite varied. There is no real agreement between different experts as to what the exact prevalence is. So somewhere between 600 million to 900 million today, to reaching to somewhere between 1.3 to 2+ billion people in 25 years from now. Now, if you just total it, a rough total, and even if you take away the duplicacies, what you're seeing here is that out of the 10 billion people that will be present on the globe, more than half are going to be unwell. And this is all happening despite all the fantastic medicines whom we just touched upon in the previous 2 slides. Let's have a look at another parameter, which is how some of the diseases which were historically age-related are now shifting their incidence. So the population of less than 65 years of age is going to go from 7.2 billion to about 8 billion people by 2050. However, when you look at early onset dementia, which is dementia amongst the people of less than 65 years of age, it's going to grow from somewhere between 8 million people today to close to about 16 million in 2050, indicating a growth of about 100%. What that means is that many of us here in this room will be demented in the next 25 years. If you look at early onset cancers, again, a classical age-related disease, which used to happen only in beyond 65 years of age, is also going to increase, although albeit not necessarily with that kind of a progress rate, somewhere between about 29 million people to about 33 million, again, in a very conservative estimate. We don't quite know exactly whether that estimate is correct or not. And probably, if I take the cue from the previous speaker, some of the mathematics is yet to evolve to figure out how to do the epidemiology using some of the agents and some of the AI tools, which my belief is that in the next few years, we will see these numbers being revised significantly upwards going forward. So what does that mean? Now, if you look at this workflow, innovations leading to increased lifespan, leading to increased aging. So far, so good. This is all something we all understand, which we typically euphemistically term as increased life expectancy. It's a metric that we all feel quite proud of. A lot of governments do talk about that, how their health policies are effective using that metric. Now, what that does is, with age comes accumulation of disease, which we know. With that comes the increase in healthcare resource utilization. And with that comes the increase in the stress to the healthcare system, because healthcare system, remember, is limited. Now, this is all something that we expect and we accept. This is not something that is unusual. This is a price that we have agreed to pay for innovation. This happens today. Now, let's see what happens if we add a couple of other stresses. If we just take those 3 parameters of blood pressure, BMI, and diabetes, and add on to early onset cancers and early onset dementia, and we haven't talked about fatty liver, we haven't talked about dyslipidemia, we haven't talked about atherosclerosis at all, and what you now see is a second source of stressor into the system, which will increase the healthcare resource utilization, and unless the healthcare system grows exponentially, it will be even under more stress. So it's an interesting paradox that I hope that you are beginning to see how all the innovations that are happening today will end up leading to some kind of a stress to the system, which is unnatural. So let's have a look at what is going to happen. So as of today, we are heading into this obesogenic world, fairly obvious, sedentary lifestyles, calorie-dense foods, of course, increasing stress, which I'm sure all of us face in our respective jobs. We know the value leakages in healthcare because healthcare currently focuses on treating a disease, not preventing it. We know that a lot of individuals who have diabetes are not on medication or any other chronic disease. And also, a lot of time, diagnosis happens diagnosis is predicated on symptomatology rather than screening. If you look at the third one, as our knowledge of physiology and pathophysiology improves, we realize that some of the thresholds of different biomarkers that we set earlier on are no longer appropriate. As an example, when we moved systolic blood pressure threshold from 140 to 130, a bigger chunk of population became hypertensive. I'm fairly certain that in the next few years, HbA1c is going to go through a similar revision, and perhaps others. And as we will learn, even in the oncology diseases, some of the markers that may that may currently be used for staging a disease may very well start becoming relevant. For risk assessment of disease may start very well becoming part of disease staging. So a bigger epidemiology is likely to disease epidemiology is likely to become bigger. Now, we just talked about the increased lifespan. Increased lifespan, more accumulation of disease, which essentially means multi-morbid patients. If we look at progress, now, if any one of us has actually gone into a tier 1 or tier 2 hospital, you see that they are technological marvels. The amount of technology that is shoved into a given hospital for all different types of processes they have is quite amazing. Whether it is a life support system, whether it is operating theater technologies, or whether it is OPD systems, doesn't really matter. No matter what you look at it, it is a technological warehouse. Yet, they are the most fertile breeding grounds for infections. Global travel, global trade, essentially means animal produce, plant produce, and other organic matter now crosses border regularly. And if you look at antibiotics, fantastic medications. However, whether intentional misuse or intentional misuse, unintentional misuse, leads to superbugs. And we know every few years when the winter arises, the influenza vaccine doesn't work. And finally, inequities in access. Now, typically when we think in terms of access inequities, we think in terms of developed versus developing versus underdeveloped markets. But even in a given developed market, or even in a given market, doesn't matter what state it is in, how you adjudicate it to be, the socioeconomic disparities basically drive access-related inequities, which in turn will mean that disease burden is going to be not just imbalanced, but also higher. Which essentially means that medical innovation is not equal to lower burden of disease. It means increased lifespan, but not the lower burden of disease, which I thought is the ultimate goal of all of us which are here. Researching, developing, commercializing innovation. So with that, let's have a look at what the consequences of the lost opportunity is. If we take obesity numbers even at a conservative stage, we are looking at an annual healthcare spend of $8.4 trillion within the next 25 years just for obesity. For hypertension, it's about $2.6 to $3 trillion. For diabetes, we are looking at $1 trillion, but we know that this number will get revised. For cancer, it's about 1.5, and for dementia, we are looking at close to $4 trillion worth of healthcare spends. And if you just add them up roughly, we are looking at $18 trillion worth of sick care only on these elements. If you now add on to all other diseases, you're looking at close to about $40 trillion of non-productive GDP spend only in caring of the patients, which is not necessarily driven by increase in population. Because remember, the global population is increasing only 20%. Whereas all the other epidemiology of the diseases are going 5x, 6x, 10x times. Does that make sense? So which means we need to think beyond innovation. Now, here is an interesting part here. Flexible pricing, voluntary licensing, tiered pricing, domestic partnership, customized relationship, government contracts. These are all things that are happening today. More needs to happen. I'm pretty sure that different companies, different for-profit institutions are figuring out how to go about being flexible with their commercial approach, yet making money and ensuring the access to medications improves. Again, but this is about commercializing innovation. Let's take the second one. Forward integration. Just a quick show of hands. How many of you are aware of the 5-force model from Michael Porter? Any idea? Okay, so we have some people. So essentially, at the end of the day, the whole point is that when you are trying to service a customer, the ecosystem that services a customer has its own influencing actors. That's really the very oversimplified view of this model. In our case, the customer happens to be the doctor, the insurance payer, and the regulators. Let's, again, from a simplistic fashion. We know that Pharma 1.0 was a monolithic model where from the test tube to the market, the company did everything on their own. Big entry barriers. Then we realized that this value chain has enough, the actors can actually transform themselves into commercial entities, and that gave rise to bioinformatics, drug discovery organizations, CDMOs, CROs, etc. And all of them are making money. They're doing a good job. And more innovation is flowing through the network development. However, the firewall between pharmaceutical companies and the patients was always there, by the doctor or by the payer. They were sort of the gatekeepers between the pharmaceutical company and the patients. In the last few years, some companies have started getting into these partnerships where they're influencing the patients somewhat, whether it is participating into population health screening initiatives, whether it is using some of the engaging with the technology companies for improving treatment algorithms, whether it is using AI tools or LLM tools. However the case may be, they're getting there, but these are all piecemeal efforts. So it's here you're not integrating yourself into the delivery of healthcare, but you're sort of knocking on the doors of the healthcare delivery industry itself by saying, can we somehow influence what you do, how you do it? Which essentially brings me to the third topic, which I think is probably where we want to go, is that instead of thinking about increasing lifespan, maybe we want to think in terms of increasing health span. Now, this requires a rethink. Some effort is already happening. Some effort in different pockets are already happening where you have these different technologies around genomics, different technologies of risk assessment. Of course, now with the large language models and perhaps even with the small language models, your risk assessment is becoming more targeted, which in turn can lead to better prevention or better interventions ahead of time. Now, all of this is really good, but it is all in small pockets per se. And it requires at least a certain serious thinking on the table to say, if we are in the business of developing innovations and the metrics of health are deteriorating, how do we bridge that gap? How do we resolve that paradox? And that's really what I really wanted to bring to you for with this particular talk. So just to summarize, innovation has saved millions of lives, but the global disease burden continues to increase. Medical breakthroughs have transformed survival. Macroeconomic growth has also brought in sedentary lifestyles, increasing stress, and of course, socioeconomic inequities. There's a clear trend in the increase of CVRM, CNS, and even cancer disorders, especially in the younger age. And finally, these trends, they basically create a premonition of almost a cataclysmic future in terms of what would happen to a significant portion of the population if these metrics don't come under control. Which means the transformation of what I refer to as sick care to actually health span stewardship might actually become a necessity than being a luxury. And for that, we actually invite you to our roundtable discussion at 4:30, where maybe we can get some ideas from you, and we'll post those perspectives out in the world for somebody to take on. Thank you very much.